she's requesting to stay.
That's fine.
She has concerns about the step.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Where exactly should I?
I was trying to figure that part out, actually. Maybe right next to the witness stand?
Josh.
Yeah.
If we go over there, I can stand there.
Let's get you sworn in.
Okay. Yeah. Couple of things.
Okay.
Listen to Mr. Sproul. I've had this conversation before. Don't move furniture in my home around. All these electronics, everybody's using them for all kinds of different things. If you run them over a wire and it gets disconnected, nobody's going to be using your electronics. So that's why we have it the way that we have it set up. That's why you need to ask before you start moving things around. Wouldn't be right if I went into your office and started moving stuff around either. So let's not do that. Dr. Lewis, if you would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay. We have had, just a minute, we've had some conversations and a couple of things. I understand that you had a meeting with Ms. Stauch and Mr. Tellini on Sunday. Okay. You can't really mention anything about that or anything that you learned from that. I see that you're puzzled by that. In Colorado, the rules governing trials and my orders are that all expert reports are to be provided to opposing counsel no later than 35 days prior to the time of trial. I know that may be a surprise too, because your report was not provided 35 days prior to trial. I am allowing you to testify to the matters that I have in your report, or that you have referenced in your report. I think it's dated.
There's one that was February 13th and one that was March 16th.
Thank you. So you can talk about things that are in your reports of February 13th and March 16th, but nothing after that. In addition, my understanding is that, and I'm not sure when this was discussed, but there was information that Ms. Stauch may have sustained a concussion, I think during softball, and may have had some of her teeth knocked out as a result of that. You can't mention that either, because that's not in your report either. But I will say this, you can, it's the first report, right, Mr. Tellini?
It is. And the only other thing I would just supplement regarding the softball, there's nothing in any of the reports about the teeth being knocked out. There was in the reports, specifically CMHIP, documented that Ms. Stauch said that she had concussions playing softball, and then in her
Let me finish the advisement to the witness before we go down another avenue. So you do have in your February 12 letter, you do have a report that she was severely injured when a shelf fell on her head and knocked her unconscious. You can talk about that. That's all okay. That she was taken to an emergency room, required a CAT scan, had a discharge with a diagnosis of brain damage. You can talk about those, but you can't talk about the softball incident. So with that, you can give Mr. Cook some direction as to where you would like to be.
She has a clarifying question, I believe.
Okay, sure.
I believe, Your Honor, that the incident was mentioned, but that it is only the problems having to do with her teeth that can't be mentioned. Is that correct, that the incident itself had been?
No, what you can't mention a softball incident. You can mention general head injury. The reason for this is Colorado has very, and I know that you testify in different states, and the rules vary from state to state, and I understand that. In Colorado, there are specific rules about disclosure of reports, and I've issued orders in this case, as I do in all, about expert opinions shall be disclosed and the basis for those and the breadth of those. And typically that means that if it's not in your report, you don't get to talk about it. And I've looked through the report. There's not a mention of a softball incident in your report. There is a mention of the shelf falling on the head. Mr. Tellini in a minute is going to tell me that you should be able to talk about the softball incident because it's mentioned in a CMHIP report. I understand that, but you don't have any opinions in any of the reports that you issued that reference how the softball incident play into your opinions. Does that answer your question?
So,
Okay, okay. And we have two options, maybe. You can sit next to it.
You said she, I think with this system, she might be able to get
Would-
up there.
No, she's fine.
Okay.
Would it be okay if I finish my whole
Oh, yeah.
statement? Okay,
Yeah.
all right. We have two options. We can sit you next to the witness box, and we can put that microphone closer to you so that you're not having to hold a microphone. The other option is that we have a microphone and I don't know, I guess, and you would have to hold it in your hand when you're talking. So it's up to you. Some people might find that uncomfortable. I've never done it. Don't think I would ever want to, but it's up to you.
it's more familiar.
Okay. All right. So, and I don't, those steps on that witness stand are tricky. That's why you'll see that they have tape on them, so that, because we've had people fall out of them and fall into them and all of those sorts of things. So it's up to you, whatever you think is more comfortable. I will tell you that that chair does not move. It swivels, but it doesn't move forward. And I don't think it rocks either. So it does. Yeah, so it moves forward a little bit. So it's up to you how you think you would be more comfortable. So just tell Mr. Cook what you want to do. Yeah, but before you move there, you got to make me one promise, and that is that you're not going to try and get out of that stand by yourself. Okay, all right.
Okay.
As long as we're on the same page, because I don't want you to get hurt. And
That works.
does that work? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and bring the jury in then. All rise for the jury, please. Dr. Lewis, you can stay there. That's okay. Okay. Thank you. You may all be seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358, People versus Letecia Stauch. Record should reflect the jury has returned to the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you will note that there is somebody in the witness stand as opposed to having us call that person up because of Dr. Lewis's physical issues. We brought her onto the stand ahead of time. You can see that there's a wheelchair by her as well. So she's already been sworn in. And with that, Mr. Tellini.
All right. Good afternoon, Dr. Lewis.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state and spell your last name for the record?
Dorothy Lewis, Lewis, MD.
Okay. And Dr. Lewis, we're going to talk a little bit to start off with about your education and then some of your work experience that has given you insight into some of the issues that we're going to be discussing and then some of your other qualifications. Is that okay?
Fine.
All right. Where, Dr. Lewis, did you go to undergrad?
I went to Radcliffe College of Harvard University.
And was there a rank in which you graduated from there? Was there a rank in which you graduated? Were you magna cum laude?
I was, magna cum laude, right.
Yes. And what does that mean?
That's with high honors.
Okay. And after graduating from there, where did you go to school next?
I subsequently went to Yale University School of Medicine.
And do you remember what year you graduated from Yale University School of Medicine?
In 1963.
After you graduated from Yale Medical School, where did you go next? Did you do a fellowship or what did you do next?
After graduation, I received a fellowship from the National Institutes of Mental Health, and it was a research fellowship, and in which I was studying the ability to measure an individual's capacity for intimacy, for the ability to relate warmly to other human beings or empathically to other people.
And how long did you do that for?
For a year.
Okay. And what did you do after that?
After that, I did an internship in pediatrics
And how long did you do that?
for a year.
For a year? And what did you transition from your internship in pediatrics? Where did you transition to next?
I then did my adult psychiatry training at the Yale University School of Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry.
Okay, so then you went back to Yale to specialize in psychiatry, correct?
Correct.
And how long were you at Yale Medical School the second time?
Endless. It
Okay.
it was 2 years in adult psychiatry, and then I did 2 years in child and adolescent psychiatry.
Okay,
So that would be a total
I think of
with
4.
medical school, quite a few years.
Okay. And then with your training specifically in adolescent and pediatric psychiatry and psychology, what did you use? Where did you take that training and where did you go to next?
When I studied adult psychiatry, I did my first year of training at the West Haven VA hospital, and then the second year of adult training was completed at Yale New Haven, mostly on the inpatient service and in part on the outpatient clinic.
What kind of stuff did you see when you worked with the VA?
Everything.
Everything.
Yes. It was primarily men, and it was individuals who had varying amounts of experience and time in the service. But it was an inpatient service, and much of the time I was on a locked service because it was with patients where there was a risk to themselves or perhaps to others, were in an open ward.
Okay. And then after that, did you move on and do other stuff in either pediatric or adolescent psychiatry?
Yes. After the adult training, I spent 2 years at the Yale University Child Study Center, and this was actually most of the training there was outpatient training in diagnosis and treatment of children and adolescents.
And at some point in time, did your training in pediatric and adolescent psychiatry come to kind of intersect to some degree with the court system?
Yes.
Could you explain that for us?
Yes. During my training in child psychiatry, I became interested in the juvenile court in New Haven. And so I began by just spending 1 day a week at the juvenile court, just sitting, listening in, and being available if there were any way I could be useful. And at that time, it became clear that the court was handling some extremely emotionally, psychiatrically, sometimes medically, neurologically disturbed children and their families. And what is more, they really had no services to offer these people. So what I did is I collaborated with the head of probation and also with the chief judge at the court, and we applied for a grant to create a clinic at the juvenile court in New Haven. And to the best of my knowledge, I think it was the first court clinic, period, psychiatric clinic in Connecticut that had ever been. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that it was. And to the best of my knowledge, I worked there for quite a few years, and it has continued to be funded, and it continues to exist.
Exist even today?
I think so.
Okay. Were there a time then when you kind of moved from working with adolescents to an older population with psychiatry?
Yes, I'm trying to think of
Okay.
any exact of when that occurred.
Well, do you remember being invited to join either the facilities of Columbia University or New York University
Uh,
or NYU?
Well, there was another year in between there.
Oh, well, what happened in that other year then? I'm sorry.
While at the juvenile court clinic, the purpose of the clinic was one, service, and to the court and to the families there, and also research if any research issues came up to study them. And so I worked with a neurologist, a social worker, learning disabilities people, what have you, and we discovered that there were a fair number of pretty serious psychiatric, neurologic disorders in this group. And what we did is we did some studies to try to measure, were there any differences between, let's say, ordinary adolescents in the New Haven area who were not delinquent and the court clinic population. And we found that indeed there were. And we published some papers on the differences between actually some of the fairly severe neuropsychiatric problems that distinguished the delinquent group from the other group, from the matched group of non-delinquents. And somehow our work became better known. And then
While we're going back and talking about that work, were those in
What?
what are called, back to those articles being published, were those published in peer-reviewed journals?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe so.
And what is a peer-reviewed journal?
A peer-reviewed journal is it's a scientific journal, and it's a journal in which you submit your whatever your research findings are, and then they are reviewed by other people who are experts in your field, often bigger experts in your field than you are, and they're reviewed to see whether they merit being published or not. And they were. And subsequent to that, I think I'd forgotten to mention, I received a call from someone at the state, somebody I think in corrections, and they had some funds in order to study juveniles at a correctional institution in Connecticut that had been created for seriously aggressive delinquents. It was a kind of new concept. And they asked whether I could put together a group similar to the group whom I had put together for the court clinic, and whether we could study the juveniles at the institution for severely violent delinquents. And so we did do that, and we did do research that compared some of the more aggressive delinquents with the less aggressive, and eventually we were able to move out a little and we were able to actually get a group of non-delinquents, and we were able to do a matched sample. It was from New York and from Connecticut, of delinquents and non-delinquents from the same socioeconomic background, but one had been in trouble with the law, one had not. And we published that. I think that was maybe one of our more influential kinds of papers. And I think that it was perhaps as a result of that and some of the other papers that we had published that I received invitations to join the faculty at at several of the universities in New York. And so I moved my work and I moved to New York. I moved my work to New York City.
And back to those studies that were fairly influential, was part of the reason they were influential is because they were kind of groundbreaking and contrary to how people had been looking at juvenile offenders prior to that.
Oh, yes, they were different from what I had expected. When I began my work, it was during the era of West Side Story, where we're depraved because we're deprived, right? And really, that was how I had trained and what I expected to find. And I was surprised to find what I found at the court clinic and then later at the School for Delinquent Kids. And yes, it was new, and it was, it's always been an area of disagreement, of argument, of questioning. But I think by now it's fairly well accepted. But at the time, it was a surprise to me and to the people who read our work.
Okay. And then you were indicating you moved your practice to New York. Where specifically in New York?
Well, I received invitations to join the faculty of Columbia University, Cornell University, and New York University. And it was, it was a difficult choice, a kind of heady choice. And I decided to pick NYU, New York University. It may have been the least prestigious of the three, but they had a prison. And New York and Cornell and Columbia, they were not delighted having services for violent adolescents and, or violent adults, whereas NYU, first of all, its base is Bellevue Hospital, and Bellevue was the very first, I believe, the very first general hospital in our whole country, anywhere. And NYU was, or Bellevue was very well known for having a prison unit in it. And Cornell and Columbia didn't go for that. So I decided to take a position at NYU at Bellevue, and I commuted there for about 20 years from New Haven to New York.
And then, so that allowed you to continue doing research in a certain population and how neurological and psychiatric things affect that specific population. Would that be accurate?
Yes, it extended your opportunities, because in a general hospital you have equipment, you have MRIs, you have EEGs, you have the ability to do 24-hour EEGs. There are opportunities that you just don't have at a court clinic or in a detention facility, so that it did give you an opportunity. Also, it had other faculties. They're all different fields in any general hospital, so it gave you the opportunity to consult. If you didn't know what was going on or you had questions, you had other people you could ask and you could consult with, so that it was an ideal place to try to do research on. By this time, the research was on the correlates of violence and the distinction between what perhaps creates a violent individual and what kinds of things may be protective from violence.
And did you continue, so you continued to do research, and did you continue to have articles published in peer-reviewed journals?
Yes.
If you were just going to guess off of the top of your head, how many articles in peer-reviewed journals have you had published that specifically go to kind of this type of thing you're talking about, criminal acts in neurology and psychiatry?
Well, almost all of them are in that field. I haven't counted. My guess is somewhere between 100 and 200. But
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know.
And then at some point, because of the articles that you've had published and the research that you had been done, were you then starting to be requested to do evaluations or consult on criminal cases?
Yes, actually, you remind me of how this did come about.
Okay.
We had, I had started to do a study on homicidal young children, and it turned out that that in our young ward for kids, psychiatrically impaired children, that there were a high percentage of actually homicidal young children. This was a shock to me. I did not expect this. And when we published, we actually would categorize what we found because it was hard for us to believe and hard for others. But a child tried to set fire to her mother's hair. Another child attacked a babysitter with knives. So that it was a surprise. And it was published, I think it was published in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry or in the American Journal of Psychiatry. But now I recall how I came to see adults. The article came to the attention of Diane Sawyer, who was on television at the time in a morning show. And so I was interviewed about our findings there. And we had found that the homicidal young children at Bellevue differed from the non-homicidal but mentally disturbed children at Bellevue in several ways. One was that there were histories usually of very severe physical and or sexual abuse. The extent to which emotional abuse contributed, we were not able to really measure well. But a combination of that, a history of severe brain injury or injury to the central nervous system, and or a history of a predisposition to certain kinds of now things that we consider to be, at least in part, genetic predispositions to psychoses, as in individuals who are predisposed to whatever schizophrenia now is. It changes its definition from year to year or so, but it's considered a severe and in part, heritable disorder. So that we discovered that this distinguished the homicidal kids from the other ones. And 2 days after I had been interviewed, I received a call from from I think one of the heads of, I think it was the public defender's office in West Palm Beach in Florida.
Yeah.
I think it was Dick Burr there. And he said that he or people on his staff had witnessed the interview with Diane Sawyer. And he said, I think I have a case in my group that sounds so much like the children you described. Would you be willing, he happens to be on death row, would you be willing to come down to Florida and examine this person? And I said, sure, yeah. And so I did go down, and I did as careful an assessment as I could. At the time, I did not have all of the assistants, like the neurologist I worked with, the psychologist, what have you. But by God, the gentleman that I saw resembled these kids. And that was that. And a few months later, I received another call. I believe, again, it was from Dick Burr. And he said, I think we have another inmate. And I think his group was responsible for all of the death row inmates at West Palm Beach in Florida then. And would you come down and see this person? And I did. The thing that I remember most about that particular individual was that he had a dent in his skull. We tend to do neurologic as well as psychiatric assessments as far as we can. And he had a dent, and it turned out that his father had run over his head with a cart and a horse. And you don't get much better data than that in terms of documenting injury. And we did find that, yes, there were similarities again. And so again, we pulled together a few $1,000s, and then I was able to recruit a neurologist, Dr. Jonathan Pincus, and a learning disability specialist, Barbara Bard, who taught at one of the colleges in Connecticut, and a psychologist, I do not remember at the moment who it was. And what we did is Dick Burr had us evaluate all of the death row inmates that were in his group or his assignment, with one exception. And the one exception was there was one inmate there who had been diagnosed as having a severe psychotic disorder. And we didn't want to see anyone who had already been evaluated, and we didn't want to skew in the direction of pathology or not pathology. So that subject was eliminated. But other than that, we evaluated all of the inmates, the death row inmates in his group, and we published that study, and I think that was published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. And I think that that's what kind of gave my work a sort of kick in that direction, because it was unexpected and fascinating, new insight into some of the things that go along with homicidally aggressive behavior.
And since that time, could you estimate how many criminal cases you've been asked to do evaluations on?
Oh dear, I don't know. I'm not certain. I would have to guess somewhere between 1 and 200 or more adults on death row by and large, but I'm not sure. It could be more.
And a significant portion of those cases that you were brought in to do the evaluations on were death penalty cases, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And during the course of this work, did it start to become apparent to you that there were many cases of, it was called multiple personality disorder at the time, but now it's called dissociative identity disorder? Many cases of individuals on death row who had the disorder who had not been diagnosed properly.
No.
Okay.
In part, when I say no, that doesn't mean that it didn't exist. What it means is that when I trained, that the very diagnosis was up for grabs, and perhaps it still is. It depends on the experience, the sophistication, the training of the individual. But I had been trained to be very skeptical about the existence of this kind of disorder, and so I have little question, but that maybe over the first quite a few years that I worked on death row or worked with very dangerous people, I think I missed the diagnosis because you can't see what you don't believe exists. You just can't. You miss it, and so that I'm fairly certain that it existed, but I didn't recognize it. And then over the years, as well as as I was confronted with more obvious kinds of cases, and also sometimes people had diagnosed something before I had, and when I was asked to evaluate the individual, I became more aware of what this disorder was like. But no, when I first went into this field, I did not have any idea that I would be seeing this,
Yeah.
nor did I think it existed really.
And then through your training experience over the years, you were able to recognize it and diagnose it more often. Would that be accurate?
Yes, and what I tended to do, because I was aware of my own skepticism, we do not often videotape our interviews. It's not usually possible. It's a very complicated thing in a prison. But what I did do was, if there were cases where I said, nobody is going to believe this, those are the
Yeah.
cases that I would say, let's videotape these and then leave it up to whoever sees it, if it's a jury, if it's other clinicians. But so it was at that point that we started to at least videotape some of our more problematic cases. And then you could start to document more of the objective signs, symptoms, behaviors that that led to that diagnosis.
And have you published peer-reviewed journals on either multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, as is now known?
Yes.
Do you know how many?
No,
Okay.
I don't. Some I can think of one that I think is the most maybe important one that we published, and the reason was that in a lot of these kinds of cases, particularly cases where there is a question of malingering or of trying to get away with something or what have you, you really want to be able to document something that you didn't create. It was there before they set eyes on you, because when people make this diagnosis, they're often accused of suggesting it. And so what we would try to do is at least document and videotape when there were data that antedated our contact with the individual whom we were seeing, and that's how we would get objective evidence that something existed.
And you also ended up writing a book based primarily on your dealing with death row inmates who suffer from, at that point, I think I said multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder.
Yes.
What was the name of that book?
Guilty by Reason of Insanity.
And then you've also been the focus of a documentary that was on HBO.
Yes.
So you told me a little bit about that. Sure.
Our work became better known. Well, better known in certain circles, I guess. And a producer named Alex Gibney became aware of my work and just contacted me to try to get consultation on a mini series that he was going to be creating with Laura Dern, with the actress, and she was going to play a woman psychiatrist who saw death row inmates. and somehow he got my name and interviewed me, and I brought with me some of the tapes that we had made of some of the more interesting cases that we had had. And after, 2 or 3 sessions working together, he said, Dorothy, I don't want to do the mini series. I want to do a documentary on you. And it was a staggering occurrence. And of course, I said, fine.
Yeah.
And so we worked on it together for about 4 years. And alas, it came out, I think, the very first day of COVID, a disaster. And it now it's on HBO, and it can be seen, and it's called Crazy Not Insane.
So the same title as your book?
I beg your pardon?
The same title as your book?
No, the book is Guilty by
Oh, that's right.
Reason of Insanity, and the documentary on HBO is Crazy Not Insane.
Have you ever been qualified to testify as an expert in a court of law?
Yes.
Do you know how many times?
No.
What are some of the jurisdictions that you've been qualified as an expert?
I can tell you states.
Sure, that would be.
Let me just name a few. Let's see, the state of Washington, California, Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Kentucky, New Jersey.
And do you know what fields have you been qualified to give expert testimony in?
What?
What fields?
In what fields? As a clinician, as in
The clinical psychiatrist?
Yes, as a psychiatrist, I think that I've been asked, particularly when there have been issues of psychiatric and neurologic combinations of disorders or questions, because, well, obviously the brain and the mind are connected, and so that your training is in both fields. In psychiatry, 2/3 of your exams are in psychiatry, 1/3 in neurology. Vice versa, if you're a neurologist, 2/3 of your boards are in neurology and 1/3 in psychiatry. And since I worked and published with Dr. Pincus, who was a professor at Yale, and then I think at St. Elizabeth's, we were often asked to work on similar cases and work together and learn from each other.
And at least now you're, just for the jury's knowledge, right now you're more or less semi-retired, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so are you currently board certified right now?
Yes.
Okay. What are you board certified in?
In psychiatry.
In psychiatry. Your Honor, at this point in time, I would offer Dr. Lewis as an expert in psychiatry and ask her to be allowed to issue opinions in accordance with.
Prosecution
May I vote aye, Your Honor?
on qualifications?
Yes.
You may.
Good afternoon, Dr. Lewis. How are you doing?
Hello.
My name's Dave Young. You and I have never met, correct?
Correct.
I just want to ask a couple questions about what you're doing now. What does semi-retired mean?
Well, I've retired from teaching regularly at NYU and at Yale, although I may give a talk now and then, or in another setting, I may be invited to do a presentation or give a talk. And I'm working on analyzing data. We have a great deal of data that have never yet been analyzed, so that I'm working on that and working on writing, and on occasion accepting a case such as this to assist in the diagnosis or it's usually of a violent individual.
And when you testified earlier about certain circles recognize you as an expert in the field, what did you mean?
I don't recall using the term certain circles. Could you remind me of?
Sure. I forget what the question was, but you said that you were being recognized as perhaps one of the pioneers in dissociative identity disorder within certain circles. Do you recall saying something like that?
Well, I can transpose it a little bit. I have done the chapters in the past, I guess over the past maybe 15 years now, in the major psychiatry textbook, the comprehensive textbook of psychiatry, initially by Friedman and Kaplan, and then Kaplan and Stauch, and I have, for example, I've published in the last two editions, I did the chapter on antisocial behavior, criminality, and violence. And I also have written, but I think it's the 11th edition, has not yet been published, but I have in press the chapter in that particular textbook, and I think that's pretty generally agreed upon as the most accurate and relied upon textbook in psychiatry in this country, maybe anyway.
So, and the circles you're talking about is the field of psychiatry, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, are you licensed to practice medicine in the state of Colorado?
No.
Are you licensed to practice psychiatry in the state of Colorado?
No.
Are you licensed to conduct forensic examinations on defendants charged with criminal cases in the state of Colorado?
I believe I'm recognized as an expert and permitted to do that, but I don't have a license in Colorado. I've tried to maintain, for the most part, licenses where there is reciprocity. And all these states where I have mentioned, I'm not licensed in each of them, but usually on the basis of places where I've for years, I continued having a California license, a New York license, and a Connecticut license because they tended to be reciprocally recognized in other states. And hence, I could testify there, but I do not hold a license in each of these states. And indeed, I'm now just retaining my New York license because it's fairly expensive to have a license in each state. And if should I need to, I can, I can reapply, and there is reciprocity usually.
So we're clear the answer to my question was no?
Well, the answer is I don't have a license here, no, but I've been permitted to testify in cases in states in which I do not maintain a license because it would mean 50 licenses.
But it would also mean that you would be regulated, right, by those state agencies that regulate psychiatrists who are licensed to practice in those states.
There are only, to the best of my knowledge, the reason that I, from very early on, the reason that I took out a California license
And
was
Doctor, I want to.
well, in order to be recognized.
Can
Well,
you just answer my
yeah,
question about
yes.
Colorado? Okay.
Yes.
There's nobody that can regulate you in Colorado because you're not licensed, correct?
I don't think that's correct. I think that I believe that your medical boards or your boards in psychiatry could certainly license me for the purpose of, say, testifying in a case, to be recognized as an expert, but I would not have to pay, say, $500 a year to 50 states in order to maintain a license there. But there is reciprocity in almost every state. In California, you have to have your license within 2 years, or it's very hard to be recognized there. Therefore, I've tried to maintain licenses in places where if I did not get them early enough, there would be a risk of not being recognized there.
Did you contact anyone in Colorado to see if you had reciprocity in the state of Colorado?
No, I did not. It was my understanding that 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 there were only, I could be mistaken, but that there are only two states, Florida and California, where it is really very important that you actually have a license and pay for it every year in order to maintain your license there. But otherwise, there's everywhere I've been, there has been reciprocity. I didn't even question it here. I assumed that this had been ascertained. Am I mistaken? Is it different here?
Well, I'm asking you.
I don't think so. I believe that that there is reciprocity if your credentials are good, and if you are board certified. Your board certification is kind of a recognition that you are trained, prepared, and competent to work in that state.
But Colorado would have no authority to reprimand you, for instance, if you did something wrong as a psychiatrist.
No.
No, the objection sustained. Move to a new area.
When's the last time you've been qualified as an expert in the field of forensic psychiatry?
I am not a forensic psychiatrist.
What fields have you been qualified in the past then?
In psychiatry.
When's the last time you treated someone as a psychiatrist?
Oh my goodness. In the past year.
Okay. Do you do that as part of your retirement? When you say you're semi-retired, do you treat
Yes.
patients as well?
Yes, on occasion I will, sure. Or will consult, or by and large now I do more diagnosis and consultation and less ongoing treatment.
Those are my questions, Jack. Thanks.
The witness will be, Mr. Tellini, you wanted to proffer this witness as an expert in the field of psychiatry?
Yes, sir.
The witness will be so qualified. Go ahead.
Dr. Lewis, let's just clear that up.
You need a license to practice medicine in a state if you are treating an individual, correct? So if you were providing medical care and trying to help somebody with their problem, as opposed to just seeing what their problems were, that's when you need the medical license.
Well, I'm not sure it's restricted to that. I'm not positive that you would define it that way because of reciprocity. And you know what one might be able to do is get a time-limited period in which you could treat a patient. I've never been in a position where that's been an issue or where that's in question, but again, the reciprocity recognizes that you're competent to work in these states in your field.
And just to be clear, I didn't contact you hoping that you would treat Ms. Stauch. I contacted you to see if you would evaluate her.
Yes.
Okay. And you've not provided any type of medical treatment other than the evaluation to Ms. Stauch.
Right.
Okay. When I contacted you regarding this case to see if you would assist, what type of information then did you seek out or were given before you came out here to perform the evaluation of Ms. Stauch?
I would have to look at.
And if it's okay with the district attorney, may she refresh your recollection?
Sure.
In addition to interviewing for 14 hours.
Yes.
And consulting with a social worker, investigator with you, and reviewing the reports of Drs. Torres, Gray, and Grimmett. I've looked at incarceration records and nursing records and these kinds of jail
Yep.
documents. I've looked at at correctional psychiatric records and also at whatever records were produced by clinicians who were working with the prosecution. And I've reviewed nursing notes, handwriting samples, signatures of Letecia, and I've looked at whatever medical records were available, police reports, FBI reports, the autopsy report on Gannon, and a review of the prosecution's witness tapes.
Okay. And all in all, that I believe it was about 6 different binders full of paperwork that we actually mailed to you.
Yes,
Does that sound about right?
I think so.
And so it was quite a bit of information that you reviewed even before going to see Ms. Stauch.
Hundreds of pages.
One of the things that did some of the unusual facts of this case kind of perk your interest at all?
Could you clarify?
Well, as far as the violent nature of the assault on an 11-year-old boy, the fact that he was then transported to Florida, the fact that
No, I think the witness asked whether he could clarify, overruled.
the account of the different.
Could you start that sentence over?
Sure. As far as unusual things that kind of perked your interest, so to speak, the violent nature of the offense, of the assault on the killing of the 11-year-old boy, the way in which the body was transported to Florida and disposed of, the numerous different stories that Ms. Stauch had given trying to explain the disappearance.
I wouldn't characterize it as piqued my interest. When I get a case, I study what is in front of me, and there are many different details in a case that are far more interesting than whether somebody did some of the acts that you're describing or whether the body was handled in certain ways. I can't say those particular things piqued my interest. The case itself it's always interesting because it's not, there's so many reasons and combinations of reasons that lead to bizarre and violent behaviors that I can't say that one thing piqued my interest more than another.
And you came to Colorado Springs to do the interviews of Ms. Stauch in November of 2022?
Yes, I believe so.
And you did about 14 hours of recorded interviews with her.
I think so.
Okay.
You timed, I did not time.
Okay. And one of the things, actually, these interviews were done at the El Paso County Jail, correct?
Yes.
And I was actually present there with you while these interviews were being done.
Yeah.
Object as to leading.
That part is, you can ask her who was there.
Who was I there?
Yes.
Was there a reason that you wanted me there for these interviews?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One reason that I very much like an attorney or attorneys or people involved in the case to be there when I'm there is I want them to see what I see. I don't want it to be my description of what happened because my way of seeing it may differ from your way of seeing it. And therefore, I want the person to see it, particularly in unusual cases in the sense that cases where people will be skeptical of findings, for example, in dissociative cases. These are cases that, as you know, are areas where there's a lot of skepticism and a lot of questioning. So that I like the attorney also because he's going to be presenting the case. I may not have anything to do with it. He may fire me, but he's going to be involved. And so I like the attorney to be there. And then there's one other reason, it's safer that way. And it's taken me a while to learn this. When I was a whole lot younger, I was a whole lot sillier and a whole lot braver. But I like to have attorneys there or someone there with me so that I'm in a safe place and I can relax and do my thing.
Were there any precautions taken about where I was seated to kind of prevent me from influencing things?
Well, I can tell you what I do all the time.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And I assume I did this with you. And again, I didn't always do this.
Okay.
It came by hard knowledge. I had worked on cases where the attorney sat wherever he felt like sitting. And there was a particular case where I was sitting facing the defendant at the time, and the attorney was seated behind me, so that he and the defendant saw each other eye to eye, and I didn't see what the attorney was doing behind my back. And it became clear to me after a while that something was going on there, nod, nod, wink, wink. And it's not like me to do this, but at some point, if I may be less than polite, I said, wait a minute, cut the crap.
Yeah.
I said, what's going on here? I said, if you two have stuff you want to talk about with each other or whatever, go ahead. But it was clear that there was communication going on there, and I could not rely on what the defendant was saying, looking at me. And I left the room. I said, I'm going to get up and leave now, and you two talk about it. Go ahead. And I'll be back, and maybe we'll go on, maybe not. And I waited for a while, came back in, and they said, yeah, they would stop this. And then I changed the positions so that I could see both what the defendant was doing and what his or her attorney was doing, so that there was no, as far as I could prevent it, there was no communication between the two of them. And so I did, if memory serves, this was recent enough so that I knew enough to place you. Is that correct? Is that where I did place you?
Well, and we have a stipulation for all the 14 hours of video has been admitted. And so if the jury wants to view the videos, they are going to be more than welcome to when they go back to deliberations, and they can confirm both seating positions and that there wasn't any crap going on. Yeah.
Mr. Young, is there a stipulation?
Yes, there is, Your Honor, and these are people's exhibits. I realize this is defense case, but
Yeah, it's
there was
okay.
a stipulation to admit people's exhibit 729 through 734. 729 is an interview that took place on November 15th, 2022 in the morning. 730 is an interview that took place on November 15th, 2022 in the afternoon. 731 is an interview that took place on November 16, 2022 in the morning. Exhibit 732 is an interview that took place on November 16, 2022 in the afternoon. 733 is an interview that took place November 17, 2022 in the morning. And finally, 734 is an interview that took place on November 17, 2022 in the afternoon. I'll just give these to the court for you.
Yeah, that'll be fine. Then exhibits 729 through 734 will be admitted. Mr. Tellini, go ahead.
Thank you.
Those are in CDs, not thumb drives yet.
They're thumb drives actually, because they're larger.
Oh, all right. Okay. Right, Mr.
Okay.
Cellini?
All right, and Dr. Lewis, before we kind of delve into the subject matter of those 14 hours of interviews, I want to talk about some things more general. I want to talk first about disassociation and what is disassociation?
It's not an easy question. It's first of all, disassociation is not like one single fact. It isn't like a strep throat and that's it. There's a germ. This is what causes it. This is what cures it. Dissociation seems to be a continuum of the way in which the human mind works at different times. And we all, at times, dissociate. An example that many people will give will be if you're ever riding along a highway. I know I've done this where you're riding and you're thinking about one thing and you pass the exit where you were going. You intended to do one thing, your mind was on something else, and so you were somewhat dissociated from what was actually happening in front of you, and then realized your mistake and corrected it. So that would be on a very ordinary day-to-day type of behavior. There's nothing abnormal about it at all. And at the other end of that spectrum is something that now is called DID. In the days when I started training, it was called MPD, or multiple personality disorder. And there, I can tell you what it seems to be and the way in which I understand it now. We do not have a good understanding of the physiology of it, of the way in which the chemistry of the brain works. We don't have a perfect understanding of the way in which the neurotransmission works. There's a lot more to learn about it. But it looks as though, first of all, we do seem to know what causes severe dissociative disorders. When very young children, even infants, are subjected to early, ongoing, relentless physical and or sexual abuse, where it is intolerable, where you can't cope with it anymore, the mind seems to self-hypnotize. Now, colleagues of mine would maybe use different terms to mean the same thing, that where you kind of self-hypnotize, and it is as if this were not happening to you, it's as if it's happening to someone else. Examples of this, some of you may have had these because these experiences occur occasionally at random, but sometimes an individual will picture looking down on himself, let's say from a ceiling. It's as if the person or the mind gets away, and they are looking down at the person to whom some kind of unpleasant episode is occurring. That is a kind of dissociation where you have psychologically, I can't tell you how, physiologically or in terms of neuroanatomy, we don't know that yet. But it does seem to be a biological, a physiological phenomenon that occurs. And so for a while, it's as if this is happening to someone else. Now, in the very serious kinds of cases that I've seen, it's very common for the individual who seems to have kind of split off from himself and not be there. It's very common for that other aspect of the person to take on the characteristics of the abuser. And this may be why it's so astonishing and why it takes so long for people to accept that this does happen, but it does happen. It is extremely common for an alter, if you wish to call the other entity that seems to split off psychologically. Not really. There's only one body there, but psychologically split off. And that is very often the abuser. And this is why, well, when I do teach about, about treatment,
Yeah.
If you know this, and if you're sophisticated about this, you never speak ill of the abuser. Now, you may know from the data that have been acquired and the histories from different people, you may know for sure that yes, indeed, this person was abused by another, let's say by a parent, by a father or something like that. You never badmouth the abuser. You just don't do it. And the reason is that the mind operates in a puzzling fashion, so that if you, in fact, in the first case where I ever recognized this, if you don't realize it, and if you badmouth the person, you say, oh, he's terrible, and someday we're going to get rid of him. This is a very naive way of trying to treat. You don't do that, because remember, there is another entity, there's another process going on simultaneously, and that other process is saying, you don't need me? Oh, sure you need me. I'm going to kill her. I'm not, and by God, I've had cases where the split has occurred and the alter has said, jump out of the car. Go ahead, jump out of the car. And where a child has tried to jump out of the car and has been saved. So you don't play favorites. In fact, you find yourself saying, if you are trying to communicate with both entities at one time, you may even say, you know, I know, let's say Sam, I know, Sam, that you've had a tough life, and things haven't been good for you either. And you know, we'd like to know more about that later on. But meanwhile, please do not encourage Susie to jump out of the car. And so that, well, one of my kids teases me and she says, Mom, you're the only one who does group therapy with one patient. But think of it that way, that all aspects of this individual often are aware. Not always. Sometimes it's too painful and the split is different, and the alternate entity is not aware of what's going on, but sometimes they are. And so in the interest of safety, you don't badmouth. And we understand, I'm sure you had your reasons for whatever you did to so-and-so, and we'll talk about that another time. And this is the best I can do to really explain to you how this happens. I believe that in the decades to come, that probably more of this will be understood, that as we get better equipment and better ways, by the way, we have tried to look at different EEGs of different personas, and to see, can you really see a different electroencephalogram going when a person is in an altered state from another state? My group has not been successful that way. There have been disagreements among them, and but there are others who believe that they have been able to distinguish these differences. I'm not convinced yet, so
Okay.
that I can only tell you what we see, what we observe, and it's a very powerful phenomenon. Even though we may not know exactly how it works biologically, it can cause disastrous effects.
And in kind of your experience in diagnosing and treating people with DID, do the alters generally have some awareness of each other? Or does that vary?
It varies. That's such a good question. It does vary. Which is, well, why? Also, sometimes there are alters that have little groups that are aware of each other, and there can be another that is not aware of, one group is not aware of the other, or the other person is not aware, or entity is not aware of the others. So that I can't generalize, but I have seen both. I've certainly seen where it's not uncommon for, in cases of homicide, where one aspect of the individual will not be aware that the other has committed a heinous kind of act, and then there will be others where they do know what happened. And
Well, and part of the DID phenomena is in some degree protective measures to keep some memories kind of hidden from some of the other alters. Could you talk a little bit about that?
to think about it,
Well, for example,
in certain instances, well, I've seen several serial murder cases in which when a different entity is operating, is in control, or seems to be in control, that entity may be the sweetest, nicest guy you ever met. And you will, if you read a little bit about it, about different cases, that sometimes serial killers are not recognized because when they are not in that homicidal, murderous, enraged entity, they are perfectly sweet, and in fact, they can talk about ethical issues and be critical, and I think that it's probably one of the reasons that it's very hard to catch serial killers, because much of the time they're not in that state, and you'd never guess.
well, because in that situation like that, if somebody does suffer from DID, they may present in a manner that they seem completely innocent because the memory of the horrible act is stored somewhere else. Would that be
Yes,
accurate?
it as far as they know, then they did not do it.
Yeah.
And then they don't look as if they did it, and this is probably one of the reasons why it is very, very hard for clinicians, not just for lay people who have not trained in this, but for clinicians to believe that this is possible, because it is so unbelievable in many ways. But it does occur.
And could that explain a situation where, well, specifically in this case, Ms. Stauch commits a horrible, violent act, and then only hours later is appearing very charming and interested in finding Gannon to the police?
Objection, Your Honor, reading.
Let's go back. We'll back up and we'll circle back around to that, Dr. Lewis. Are there any conditions with dissociative identity disorder that can be comorbid. That
can be comorbid.
comorbid, that can go along. You can have DID and other conditions.
Oh, of course, surely.
What would some of those be?
Well, one of the commonest, maybe they're mistakes, maybe maybe they both occur at the same time, but experts in this field have written about schizophrenia and DID, and they can occur, at least from what I've read, they can occur. I can't attest to this because at the moment I can't think of a particular case of mine where that exists. Certainly, we have seen we ran a clinic for dissociative identity disorder at Bellevue. After a while there, it became clear that there were enough patients coming through where they needed a clinic like that. And we saw a fair number of patients who suffered both from bipolar mood disorder and dissociative identity disorder. So those I've seen go together. Then the other thing is, anything that can happen to the brain can happen to the brain in and of itself. And the dissociative disorder may have originated years before and had its own etiology, but sure, you can have certain kinds of brain damage. You can have certain kinds of epilepsy. You can have, so yes, you can have more than one disorder.
And also, how can having a traumatic brain disorder with DID impact somebody being possibly violent?
Could you repeat it?
How could having a traumatic brain injury comorbid with DID impact somebody being violent?
It's been well established over the years. This isn't new psychiatry or neurology, that different kinds of severe damage to the brain can be followed by impulsivity and a loss of control and often violent behaviors, and any number of injuries to the brain can cause violence. Separate from that, a child who has been abused and tortured and enraged and made to feel helpless and then made to dissociate can become violent, can misperceive what is happening, can blame an altered state and attack that altered state, or can misperceive another person as an enemy of some sort. So that they do seem to be somewhat different, because one seems to have a psychodynamic quality to it, but there's something about injuries to the brain that have been reported again and again in terms of subsequent lack of control, not just of violence, but of other impulses.
Going both to the 14 hours of interviews that you did with Ms. Stauch and the collateral data that you had been provided, what were you made aware of about her upbringing, about growing up?
I did not interview any of her relatives myself. I don't believe I did anyway. I
Yeah,
don't
but do you
know.
remember getting some reports from
Yes.
the social worker,
I
Kyle?
did.
Okay.
But I'm going by what I have gotten from other people's interviews.
Okay.
And several people seem to agree that, first of all, that she came from an extraordinarily violent household, including that, well, that of her mother, Deborah,
Yeah.
and her mother's tendency to latch on to males in her environment who were extremely abusive, and abusive to her, but also apparently abusive to Letecia as well. There was one man in the mother's life who apparently pushed Letecia into a shower and beat her naked in the shower. It was these kinds of grotesquely physically, and I would call that sexually as well as physically abusive. Also, there were several of her relatives who spoke about aunts, uncles, great aunts and uncles, known as grandparents or whatever, who gave her enemas repeatedly. By the way, this is a question that not a whole lot of psychiatrists ask, but it's very important because it's one of the commoner ways that sodomy occurs in the torture of abused kids.
Well,
So
in fact, she detailed it was actually an uncle, but it was actually her grandfather, detailed to you being given enemas by him almost on a daily basis. Do you recall that? Do you recall her describing that to you, of a grandfather giving her enemas almost on a daily basis?
I do. And I recall her saying this. And also I recall, I think I'm not mistaken, that she also gave enemas to Gannon. And she also perceived this as something he wanted her to do. So that it certainly has a sexually abusive as well as a physically abusive quality
But
to it.
she did not perceive these daily enemas as being sexual in nature as far as when they were given by her grandfather, correct?
Objection, leading.
I don't know.
Okay, jury will disregard the answer.
Do you know if she perceived these enemas as sexual that her grandfather
I
gave
don't
her?
know. I don't know enough about that, and I don't have enough others to corroborate what, as far as they could glean,
Okay.
her reaction was. So I don't know.
What did she, let me rephrase this. Would the manner in which she described and other people described her upbringing be consistent with the environment that could foster DID?
They could foster,
Dissociative identity disorder.
as far as I know, again,
Yeah.
because I didn't get this firsthand. I have to go by what other people told me, and it sounded as though the household was a madhouse. That there was man after man. Not only did the mother get hooked up with very violent men, but my recollection is Letecia herself got hooked up with violent people, and that it was it was very hard for me to even keep track of the names of the various people because there were numerous males that were aggressive toward various members of the household.
Did she specifically describe anything, any type of molestation dealing with her stepfather, James?
James, she, if memory serves, she could not refer to him as father or even as James. She referred to him always as Jackass James. And it was as if that kind of made it possible for her to even refer to him, but with great disgust. I believe that he was one of the people who was involved with sexually molesting her during several years of her childhood. And so that he was one of the people who sexually molested her, to the best of my knowledge.
Do you recall that he molested her up until the time that she actually took off from home?
According to my notes, she left the home at about age 15. But also, I have in my notes that that she would run away into the woods and hide from this person, that she was terrified of him. And then at 15, that she actually left him.
Did she describe to you events or coping mechanisms that she would employ that would be consistent with dissociative identity disorder?
Coping mechanisms. I'm trying to understand better what.
Well, I mean,
kinds of
did
things
she
you're-
describe to you things that would be consistent, just in general, consistent with dissociative disorder?
I hadn't thought of it so much as describing as kind of witnessing things. For example, when I was interviewing her over a period of time, suddenly it seemed to me that she was speaking Russian. I don't speak Russian, and it only had that lilt to it. I didn't have words that sounded Russian, but it looked as though she had switched into a different entity. I think she believed she was speaking some other language, but I don't know what that was. And but I can't define in my head exactly the moment at which she did it, so that I can't tell you what the coping mechanism was. But that would be a coping mechanism to suddenly switch into something that made you more comfortable and got you out of whatever situation you felt you were in at the time.
Did she describe any alters to you or other personas?
She did. The one that I remember particularly is she referred to somebody named Maria, and Maria apparently was a physically abusive entity, and when she, my recollection was that that I actually heard her speak, and that she was harsh and angry and hurtful. Yes, so she did refer to, and in fact, it made me wonder whether, when I first saw that, I thought, have I just met the aspect of her personality that that killed Gannon? And it's a speculation. I don't know, but at the time, she is the one that is most closely allied with violence, as I recall.
Would it be unusual for alters to kind of be distinguishing on who they allowed themselves to be presented to? Like, for example, I mean, would an alter maybe less willing to come out to different evaluators?
I think that's probably a general statement you could say. But I can't say anything terribly
Okay.
useful about.
What did she describe to you about? Oh, let me back this up. Did she also describe, and you also see evidence in her medical records of possible traumatic brain injuries?
Yes.
There was a car crash. Do you recall that?
Yes.
There was also a time where a bookshelf fell out.
I'm gonna check this deleting.
No, I'm going to allow it because it seems like it's foundational at this point and it's leading up to something.
And I'm
It's there.
medical reports where a bookshelf had fallen on her head and she had lost consciousness for 15 minutes.
My recollection of that was I don't recall the medical part of it so much as I believe that she was in her teacher mode. She is quite an amazing young woman in this way, in that she's not stupid, and there are times when she seems to be able to function as a teacher or whatever. And I believe that she was in a classroom, kids had left, and I think that a bookshelf fell down on the back of her head. She fell down, and I believe she lost consciousness. And so it was a fairly severe injury to her head.
Could you talk about her description of the kind of the events leading up to Gannon's death?
Which one?
Yeah. Oh, the events that she related to you.
You know, it's hard for me to distinguish which I read and which she related to me, because they did kind of go together. She gave some of the most peculiar descriptions of what might have happened to Gannon. That, for example, at one point he's missing. She doesn't know where he is, and then at another point, a man named Eduardo comes in, rapes her, and I believe absconds with Gannon. And at another time, she talks about, I think that he was a pedophile, somebody whom she had Googled, had somehow found on the internet. And I think that that he was one of the people who had absconded with, or who had harmed Gannon. There were numerous, you'd say almost mindless descriptions of what might have happened to this child. And what puzzled me was, when you talk with her, and as if you've seen any of the pictures of her tapes, this is not a stupid girl. She is intelligent. She is in certain phases, certain states. She is able to reason, apparently logically, and to speak clearly and coherently. And yet she makes up the darndest stories that no ordinary person of below average intelligence would expect to be believed. So that, excuse me, there is a puzzle. Do you know, after I thought about all of it together, I thought, I don't think she knows what happened. I don't think she knows. And I think that, as asked at different times, this is what came into her head and this is what she produced. But I don't think she knows for sure what happened.
Could that be confabulation?
Confabulation is, confabulation is when you have no memory for what happened. It's commonest in alcoholism and things like that, where the brain has been damaged in such a way that memory is impaired. And then many alcoholics will just ramble on and on about something, and will give a story, and they will fill in parts that they can't remember, and they maybe don't even know that they're filling it in. And so her saying this could be a form of confabulation. I don't know whether at the time that she says these things, she believes them because to you or to me, they make no sense. They're silly.
Did she, back to the events and questions and how she was describing it to you, what did she describe symptoms that could, or experiences or perceptions that could be similar to psychosis?
Oh, I would say similar to that, by definition, would be categorized as psychotic.
Could you talk a little about those?
Sure. Well, one of the commonest psychotic symptoms that we're all familiar with from books, TV, would be, let's say, hearing voices, or let's say talking to people that are not there. And well, at least to my understanding, psychosis is a belief that someone has that most normal people do not have. It can be a perception. It can be hearing something that none of us hear. It can be believing something. It can be a kind of paranoid belief or what have you that doesn't make sense. It can be an auditory sound that you don't hear. And she not only could tell about talking to different beings that were not there, but you know, she puzzled things up a bit because she also, I believe, talked to God. And there are a lot of us here, probably in this room, who at times have thought that, gee, we talked to God, or we thought we had an answer, or we wished we did, or we didn't. So that you can't simply say that her having talked to God was a psychotic symptom. It may well have been. What I found more convincing in terms of her psychotic symptoms were things that she didn't tell me about, but I read through I guess they were kind of nursing or guards notes from the correctional institution where she was.
The jail?
From jail. And there were several times that different caretakers of one sort or another looked in the room and found her talking to someone who was not there. And this was not as though, as far as I knew, she didn't know anyone was watching her, or she wasn't performing for the galleries, that she was talking with somebody, and there was nobody else there. And there were several episodes like this, and those are psychotic symptoms. In dissociation, you get this when it's very common for an individual to hear alternates talking with each other, or talking to him, or talking to her. So that I think that the kind of auditory hallucination that you often associate with, say, schizophrenia, it has a more physiological, a more biochemical quality, and also it's often treated with medication that tells you that something is going on that is responsive to chemical intervention. This is different from hearing dissociated entities talking with each other. And that, as far as I know, that doesn't respond to medication.
Did she, well, how did she describe, do you recall, how kind of Gannon starting the fire and how that kind of impacted her state?
I was a bit confused by it, so I'm not positive. I can only share with you what I remember. I think there was a candle on the floor, And I think that some of the carpet burned. And this is separate. There was a different fire at another time that apparently really traumatized her, but we're talking about Gannon at this time. And I believe that she also said that Eduardo was the carpet fixer, perhaps even he helped put out the fire, I don't recall, and that then there was an attempt to cover up the fire that had occurred. But I think that she thought that he had started it with a candle.
Do you recall her describing after the candle fire incident, it was at that time she started having visions of her stepdad, James, being alive and her seeing him? Being alive and her seeing her stepdad, James.
I don't recall that it was that time particularly. There were times that she saw him. I think there was a time she was driving a car and she was on the highway and she saw some very large figure. But I can't recall that that was specifically the time she.
Well, then that would have been the next Monday that her and Gannon were driving, and you recall her describing that she actually saw James on the side of the road at that point in time.
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
Sustain, rephrase.
Do you recall anything about her, any visualizations or something that could be a visual hallucination
Yes.
that she recalled that occurred in the day or so after the fire?
Yes, I recall that I thought it was out the car window that they were driving, and I thought it was a large figure of some sort. There's also, she had a visual hallucination of some entity with a cape. These are hallucinations, and because she sees them, the rest of us do not see them. That has to be considered a psychotic symptom because it is beyond reality or the reality that we know. Yeah, she did have episodic psychotic states.
Was it at all of significance to you that the excuse when she called herself into work that early Monday morning, that it was the excuse she said was, my stepdad has been killed in a car crash?
This I categorize in my own brain as one of her least believable concoctions of what happened or what must have happened. To the best of my knowledge, this stepdad had died perhaps 8 years prior to that, and yet she was going to his funeral that day. Surely this is, first of all, it would be stupid if she were a stupid girl. She is not stupid. To give that as an explanation as why she can't do this or why she can go there. There is something about the way her mind is working then that is distorted and is not in touch with reality. I can't tell you whether this is part of a dissociative episode or another psychiatrist might want to call it a separate psychotic episode. I think you had some psychiatrists who diagnosed a borderline personality, and many psychiatrists who think about borderline states think about episodic psychoses. And certainly I couldn't argue with interpreting that as an episodic psychosis.
Do you recall her switching to the persona and talking to you in the persona of Maria?
Yes.
And you recall what Maria told you about what happened to Gannon?
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Do you recall Maria, well, not necessarily what happened to Gannon, but Maria shooting somebody who she perceived as a Cape person?
You know, I'm going to object this to leading. She just said she can't remember, and counsel's leading her.
Well, That's true. You do have to ask the other question of would it help to refresh your recollection? And you can use anything to refresh your recollection, but it did not say that you saying that would refresh your recollection. So you need to ask that question.
Would me describing what Maria said refresh your recollection?
I think if I read what Maria said, I would, that would refresh my recollection. But I do not recall exactly that. I can recall my own thinking around that time where I thought, was she in the state of Maria when she killed Gannon? And there was something about the way in which this was depicted to me where I thought, my goodness, have I met the killer alter? And so there was something about the way in which she spoke of this that led me to think that I had very likely met the most violent and most dangerous alter.
Just a second. If looking possibly at a summation of the video help you at all?
Well, I could look at it and I will tell you if it does.
This is something I haven't discovered. Can we take an afternoon break so I can look at this? This is apparently there's only one copy.
Okay. We can fix that during the break too. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take our break until, let's see, 3:25. The jury is not present in the courtroom. Is there anything we need to take up outside the presence of the jury at this point in time? Mr.
It's back at my can't get it.
Okay. Anything we need to take up from the defense?
That's right.
Prosecution?
No.
Okay, let's go ahead and bring the jury in.
Isn't there any way that we can agree with them and
Hold on.
Not right now,
because we're up on mic, yeah.
not like that?
No.
This thing is sticky.
Thank you, may all be seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358, People versus Letecia Stauch. Record should reflect the jury have the courtroom. When we took our break, we were in the midst of the testimony of Dr. Lewis. That's where we will resume. Cellini?
Yes, Dr. Lewis, did that summary refresh your recollection at all towards what the persona Maria had related to you?
Yes, somewhat.
What did Maria relate to you?
What actually, what is written here is what she said.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
do you recall independently that?
I beg your pardon.
Do you have, does that refresh your recollection?
What comes to me as I read this is that the reason that I can't cite chapter and verses, it is wildly psychotic. It is incoherent. It is
non-responsive.
well.
Spain, if you can relate what Maria told you, I think was the question. That's what you need to do.
And not, so
Like-
let me rephrase that then,
Go ahead.
Dr. Lewis. If you can't recall the exact specifics of what she said, what can you recall about the way in which she was presenting?
Yes, I can't recall the exact specifics because it is disorganized and confused and difficult to remember. But I recall her kind of reassociating all over. And she talks about her grandmother and family shooting things out the window and always needed people to guard funerals, that it had a chaotic quality, and it happened shortly after, as I recall it, shortly after I became aware of her seeming to move into her Maria persona and her more aggressive, more more scary persona, and then it is just rambling and doesn't make sense and incoherent or psychotic.
Now, in fairness, there were other things that you would have liked to have done in your examination. Could you talk a little bit about those? About as far as like an MRI or an EEG?
Correct.
Why would you like those to have been done?
There were aspects of her memory, her behaviors, her descriptions that that are consistent with certain kinds of brain damage. And for example, there are certain things that are so close in terms of dissociation and neurologic impairment, and let's say what are called psychomotor seizures, where prior to a confused state, or prior to a state where you are aggressive and moving kind of automatically but violently, prior to this, there's often a state of wooziness and dizziness, which, as I recall, she described. And following these kinds of episodes, the individual, and this is with what are called complex partial seizures, but also it can be with dissociation, the person does not have any memory of what occurred. First, there is what is called an aura. Then things happen. Very often they can be aggressive things, they can be repetitive things. And subsequent to that, the person does not remember them or remembers them in a confused fashion. And the reason that I would like very much to have been able to investigate that is, if it were, let's say if we were able to get the electroencephalograms that I would like to have had done, if indeed you saw that at a certain point, what were normal electrical activity changed and the rhythm changed and things were off and were not the way we normally think. And then it ceased. If you could combine that, because that would have been signs of abnormal brain activity. And then it would have been very possible, very likely, that during the time at which Maria or an entity of Letecia, whatever it be, that during this time when the child was being stabbed, that her brain was in an altered state, and that there is no way in hell that she could have stopped what she was doing. And the other thing is, she would not remember it. And a classic part of Maria's situation is she doesn't remember what happened. I'm not even convinced she knows she did it. And she certainly can give a variety of what you've called like confabulations, just kind of wild stories where her head just goes in different directions. I think that if you could have documented this, there is treatment for it. Whereas we're in a lot more trouble when we're dealing only with a dissociative identity disorder. That's that's a very tough one to treat. It's, it takes a certain amount of experience, talent, what have you, and investment for a long period of time. So that it matters if you find out that this is what's going on in the brain and you can target it with something to improve it, you're going to see a difference in her whole behavior.
And it was frustrating to you that I was unable to line that up for us, correct?
Relevance.
Overruled.
It was frustrating that I wasn't able to make the EEG happen for you, correct?
More than frustrating.
And just so that the jury knows, you're not here out of the goodness of your heart. You're being paid for your time.
Not yet, but I hope so.
Okay. You're being paid by the state agency that I work for.
In theory.
In theory, hopefully. And the agreement is to be paid at $300 an hour.
I thought it was $350 an hour.
Okay. I'll have to talk to my supervisors about that. But that's a discount from what you would normally charge, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Despite not having the EEG or the MRI, in your report, you indicated that Ms. Stauch was one of the most mentally ill people you'd ever come across.
Yes, the most complex.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. The more I study her and the more I remember what happened and go over it, she has such a variety of different signs, symptoms, and behaviors. She has many of the signs, symptoms, behaviors of a dissociative identity disorder. She also, if you follow the material, if as you recall, I could not remember it clearly, if you follow the parts that I couldn't remember, they're confused. They make no sense. They are psychotic. They're incomprehensible by an ordinary human being. And if they were to be read aloud to you, you would not make head or tail of them. So that I find this complicated. And it would have helped me if I could have at least eliminated or included a particular central nervous system dysfunction that I could deal with. It's always fun for a doctor to be able to treat and to be able to make something better. And so far we're not able to do that.
Despite that, are you able to come with an expert opinion regarding her sanity at the time of the death of Gannon?
Yes.
What is your opinion?
Well, I think that she was that assuming that this area is about the time that Gannon was killed.
Yes.
She was psychotic at the time. She was not in touch with reality, and she did not. I don't think she knew the difference between right and wrong. I don't know whether she even knew what she was doing.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Lewis.
Cross-examination.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Young?
What's the legal definition of insanity in the state of Colorado, doctor?
Oh, I believe that you must know the nature of what you have done and that it was wrong, and that also I think that you do add on a bit of the Durham decision, which has to do with if you cannot control your behaviors, such as to comply with the requisites of law. I believe that that is also part of an insanity defense here.
Did you look at the statute regarding insanity for the state of Colorado prior to rendering an opinions in this case?
I did, but I would have to look at it again. look at it. And I've also discussed it with others, which is why I added the Durham decision and the ability to conform your behavior, because to my mind, in many courts where I've testified, that is no longer accepted. But it was my understanding from the attorneys that that is also an aspect of insanity, the inability to conform your behavior to what is required by law.
Is that the aspect that you used in rendering your opinions in this case?
That is only one of the aspects.
Well, tell us the elements. This is what you're here for. You're here to testify that this defendant was sane at the time she committed this crime. I'd like you to explain to the jury now what law you used in rendering that opinion.
Would you permit me to read it, and I will tell you what aspects of it I
You're the expert, doctor.
concentrated on. By and large, I used a McNaughton definition of whether the person knew the nature of what he or she was doing and that it was wrong. And so that was my, that was my orientation. And then I was pleased to learn from the attorneys that also the inability to conform one's behavior to the requirements of law was also part of the definition in Colorado. The accuracy of that, I don't know, but we have discussed it, and I've said that I was surprised. I was unaware that in the other states, that since the Reagan shooting, I had thought that most of that was not any longer recognized, but I was told by the attorneys that that was one of the other factors that played a role.
As you sit here right now, do you know the legal definition of insanity in the state of Colorado?
If you would show me show me as it is written out, I will tell you whether this is what I used. I can't say it to you verbatim, but the idea has to do with whether you knew the nature of what you were doing and that it was wrong.
Well, clearly you have experience in testifying in criminal cases. You said 100 or 200 times, right?
Right.
And so you know that when you write a report, that report comes to the prosecution, it comes to the defense, it goes to the court, correct?
Yes, usually.
And in your report, you want to put what the legal definition of insanity is in the state of Colorado, because that's what you're here for. That's what you're here to testify about, correct?
When you have written a complete report with all of the data that you require to come to that conclusion, and then try to go word by word with the definition, yes, you would try to use that. Here we were using as much data as we could get. And again, if I'm mistaken and it is not an understanding of the nature of what the person is doing and that it is wrong, then I've made an error.
Well, this is what you say about insanity in your report. You say, based upon the evidence that I reviewed, in my opinion, Ms. Stauch was insane at the time of the homicide and the days following, period.
That's right. And I believe that at the time she was psychotic. And whether you use the McNaughton definition, whether you use the Durham decision or a variation of it, she was psychotic at the time. I believe she did not know what she was doing. I'm not certain she even knows that she did do it now as we speak. Okay. And that it was wrong is, if she doesn't know that she did it, the question of whether or not she knows it is wrong is, is something that can be debated. But I think that she does not appreciate the nature of what she did, or that it was wrong, and that she is guilty of having of having murdered Gannon.
So she's guilty of having murdered Gannon, but she's legally insane as
I
well? Is that
think-
what you're saying?
I think I think that she murdered Gannon. I shouldn't use the word guilty. She murdered Gannon. Again, I think you're teasing me a bit. If you would just rephrase that, I can tell you whether, because you're making me feel, gee, maybe there's a totally different definition here. But from our discussions recently about this, what had struck me most about Colorado was that you also included an inability to conform one's behavior to what was required by law. I don't know if that's wrong, but this is what I discussed with her attorneys, and part of at least what I have gone by. In addition, I believe that she did not know the nature of what she was doing.
But you knew when you came here, you're coming to Colorado, you knew that your opinion would be applied to the law in Colorado, and you knew this jury here would be listening to your opinion to see if what you had to say made sense with the law.
Yes,
You've done that to 100 to 200 times, correct?
I would guess,
And
yeah.
I've read your other reports. In your other reports, you define what insanity is in that particular state, and you explain in your report why you think someone was legally insane at the time based on the law. Why did you not do that in this case?
You know, I would have to look at the definition, and I'm sure once I look at it, I can tell you why I did not use the exact words that that perhaps are there. What a reason why in plain English I did not, I believe she was insane is that she is psychotic. When someone is psychotic, they are out of contact with reality. They do not know the nature of what they are doing, whether it is right, wrong, or indifferent. And she is and was psychotic, and therefore she was insane. If you wish to give that a different flourish or something different about it, I very much doubt that what I'm saying to you will conflict with what you're saying. Is there some reason that her being psychotic and not knowing right from wrong or what she was doing, that this is not insanity in your state?
Did you write this report, doctor?
Of course I wrote the report. I wrote, this is not a complete report. I wrote, you know, I wrote it, sent it, and had it typed. Yes,
Who typed it?
I cannot tell you who typed it.
Who'd you send it to?
I sent it to Mr. Tellini.
What did you send to Mr. Tellini?
You have the,
And I'm asking you a
Rick-
question, doctor. What did you send to Mr. Tellini?
I sent him a brief report. Initially, there was an early title that is a preliminary psychiatric impression, and then subsequently modified it to try to include anything that I had left out. If after he saw my initial report, if I had left anything out that I thought should be there.
Well, what you left out in your initial report was your opinion with regards to insanity, correct?
In my initial communication with him, absolutely. I gave him what I had up until then.
And you requested in your initial evaluation that you wanted an MRI done, an EEG done, as well as a neuropsych exam with several tests that you listed in your report, correct?
Right?
And you wanted those done before you rendered an opinion as to insanity in the state of Colorado, correct?
I wanted it before I testified, yes.
And none of those items got done.
No.
Yet you still issued a second report claiming that she's insane without any definition of why she's insane.
Well, I gave you the definition that she is psychotic and gave you the data to show it, but I did not write it in the form in which I would if I had all of those data to include in it. And I did not have them. And, I could not include what, as it was my understanding that the court refused to finance the EEG and the MRI and the neuropsychological testing.
Oh, let's
So
talk
I
about
gave
that.
you as much as I could from what
Let's
you
talk
were
about
offering.
that. On October 13th, 2022, you were scheduled to come testify to this court about why you wanted an EEG and MRI done, correct? You recall that?
No, but, say that again?
Do you not recall being asked to come testify with regards to why you needed an EEG done and an MRI done in this case?
I do not know what you are referring to. I have no idea what you're referring to, because
you-
I
were-
would have been pleased to at least talk on the phone to the judge or whatever. I begged to have these things done. I can only tell you that. And I would have spoken to anyone who wanted to talk to me about it.
Well, you were contacted well before February of 2022 on this case, correct?
Absolutely.
And you were contacted before Ms. Stout pled not guilty by reason of insanity, correct?
Right.
And she pled not guilty by reason of insanity on February 11th of 2022, correct?
I'm assuming your dates are correct, yeah.
And you didn't do anything on this evaluation until November of 2022?
I worked as hard as I could to get these. In fact, I called the neurologist for free, Dr. James Marikangas, to discuss the case because I could not get funding from this court to get these tests done. So I called and discussed it with him. I contacted Catherine Yeager, Dr. Yeager, the neuropsychologist with whom I've worked for 30 years, and worked with her and spoke with her and got as much data as I possibly could. And I begged her attorneys to get this, and their answer was that the court would not pay for those tests to be done. I had never heard, in fact, I said, I've never heard of this before, but it did not occur to me to pick up the phone and to call the judge. I didn't even know who the judge was, but I was told I could not get this and that I must get something in by then. So I didn't even call my initial contact a complete report on it. Well, I'm trying to see what I called it. I called it initial, I think, initial psychiatric impression, right?
Right, yeah, because you wanted that information before you rendered an opinion as to insanity, correct?
That is true.
And, Your Honor, at this time, I'd like the court to take judicial notice that on October 13, 2022, the request to have an EEG done, an MRI done by defense was withdrawn, and we did not go to hearing on that.
Mr. Tellini, defense position? Court will take judicial notice that on October 13 of 2022, the defense withdrew its request for an EEG in this case,
As well as MRI.
as well as an MRI.
Were you ever told that?
This is news to me right now, sir.
And of course, if this would have been done, it would have been 3 years after the crime happened. Right?
It would have been later, yes.
And so there'd be a gap between the time of the crime and the time the MRI and EEG were done.
Yes.
A lot of things could have happened in the jail within that time period that may have caused damage to Ms. Stauch's head.
This is just speculative. It would have been extremely helpful to get those data and then to see whether they looked like the kind of material that was something that would have been long lasting or something that was sudden, so that I can't really speculate on that. I did want it done then, and it mattered then.
But it didn't get done, and yet you still rendered your opinion, didn't you?
I rendered and I described what I know about the case, and I've given you my opinion of it, yes.
despite what you wrote in your book, guilty by reason of insanity. You're familiar with your book, right? That it's easy to fake mental illnesses, especially when it comes to dissociative identity disorder. And that's why you want collateral information like an MRI or an EEG to corroborate, correct?
It's not exactly correct. You don't get that to corroborate dissociative identity disorder. No, you get that to corroborate neurologic or neuropsychological impairment. No, you don't get that for dissociation.
Page 108. You probably heard this a million times when you testified, I would imagine, right?
I don't know. You'd have to read me.
Okay.
I don't.
Let me read it to you. Psychiatry, as every prosecutor who has ever cross-examined me has never hesitated to point out, is a soft discipline compared with the harder medical discipline of, say, neurology. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, there it is.
The difference between neurology and psychiatry is analogous in some ways to the difference between hard neurologic signs and soft neurologic signs. Sound familiar?
Yes, go ahead.
An MRI shows abnormal mass in the brain. The EEG shows localized spike and wave complexes. In other words, evidence of brain damage is clear. Remember saying that?
Or I should have said of brain dysfunction. I said of brain damage.
Yeah. You said evidence of
Oh.
brain damage is clear.
Or I should say of brain dysfunction.
Okay. What did you mean by that? Is that why you wanted the MRI and the EEG?
Of course I wanted that, but not in order to, you would not get a special, as I said to the jury, you would not get a special MRI or EEG based on a dissociative disorder. If, however, you do get this abnormal MRI or EEG, you then start looking in another direction and you start thinking, not only may we have dissociation, but there is some kind of documented brain dysfunction. It's operating differently. And so you would like that because you would Mr. Tellini would have a lot easier case if he were able to document that a lot of her signs, symptoms, and behaviors are the result of abnormal electrical activity. And or, as in a recent case that I did early, I think last
And Doctor, I'm going
fall,
to stop you there.
where
Let me stop you
there's,
there,
brain
Doctor,
damage.
because I want to stick to my questions here, okay? The EEG or MRI could have showed nothing as well, right? No
Right.
brain damage.
That's right.
And that would also help you in forming your opinion as well, wouldn't it?
Well, it certainly would not have confirmed a documented neurologic dysfunction.
And so all you had to go on is really Ms. Stauch's self-reporting to you in the forensic interview that you conducted.
Well, that's simple. I can't go along with that. That's all we had. But we did not have the additional neuropsychological and neurological data that I would very much have liked and I would still like. And I had no idea that this was ever withdrawn. It was my idea, or it was my understanding, that the court had refused to grant the funding to have these things done, which in my experience is a first.
Well, now you know what happened though. So why do you keep saying, you know what happened?
I
The
don't,
court just took judicial notice that the defense withdrew their request.
I know what you're telling me, but it would be presumptuous for me to say, I know now. You've put me in the middle of a debate that I can't enter into.
$350 an hour. You now know you're being paid $300 an hour.
75 if I'm traveling or whatever. So in theory,
How many hours have you billed on this case?
I don't know yet. I have not even counted. I don't know.
Why did Mr. Cellini contact you? Did he tell you?
I assume because he thought that I was reputable and experienced in this field. I think he also became aware that I existed because of the documentary that was done on my work and my life.
About dissociative identity disorder?
No, about all of my work.
When you advised him that you felt there was enough evidence for the defendant to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, what did you base that on?
I based that on, probably in my own head, I based it on the McNaughton rule, which would be that she did not know the nature of what she had done and or that it was wrong. And also subsequently, after discussing it with Mr. Tellini, based on the Durham decision that she did not have control over what she was doing, that she could not conform her behavior to that which the law required.
How did you know that back in February of 2022 when you hadn't interviewed her until November of 2022?
I'm sorry, I would have to look over what I had looked at and what I had, what I had reviewed up to the time. And I'm sorry, I can't give you the dates so that we can.
Well, did you review anything prior to talking to Mr. Cellini for the first time about the defendant changing her plea to not guilty by reason of insanity?
I'm not aware of his having changed a plea. No, I assumed, in fact, when he called me, that he thought that probably that there was an insanity defense here, and I did not think that he had one. He was pleading what, not guilty first, and then changed it to NGRA. I don't know.
You don't remember?
No, it isn't that I don't remember. It's that I assumed when he called me that he suspected that there was that she was suffering from a severe mental disorder that conformed to the criteria for insanity.
And when that happens, you had done hundreds of forensic evaluations with a lot of people who are on death row, some serious big-time murderers. Is that fair? There's a difference between a death penalty case and a homicide case, correct?
Yes.
Death penalty people are the worst of the worst.
Oh, it depends on what your state is like. No, it doesn't depend on the worst of the worst. It depends on what the law is in your state and the humanity of your state. It doesn't depend on the worst of the worst.
So people who kill and commit serious crimes are usually charged with death penalty cases. Is that fair?
Say that, the people, say that once more.
You tell me. What's
I
the
don't know.
difference between a normal homicide case and a death penalty case?
Where the state in which you commit your offense.
Well, tell us about the people you evaluated on death row. What kind of crimes did they commit?
Murder.
What kind of murders?
It varied from probably the most common thing. It would have been like a grocery store murder where somebody got kind of upset, hung up, and shot a clerk. They were a death sentence did not correspond to the grisliness of a murder.
Well, in your opinion, a death sentence never responds to the grisliness of any murder, correct?
No, I do. No.
Are you for the death penalty?
Objection, relevance, overruled.
I beg your pardon?
Are you pro death penalty?
I really try not to take a position on it. I just kind of call the shots as I see them in terms of the, of the offense and what the person did. But I do not take a political stance. I don't think I ever have.
And as a matter of fact, you've always been contacted by defense attorneys to do these evaluations, correct?
Not always, but usually.
Have you ever been contacted by a prosecutor to come in and say, testify as an expert?
Yeah, when I worked at the court clinic, and I testified for the court. When I was the head of the court clinic, I was testifying for the, for the state. And when I worked at Bellevue, when I was asked to evaluate, I was testifying by and large for the city if I testified.
Back in the 60s and 70s?
I,
1960, 1970s?
Oh, no, 2003, I finally, after 20 years of commuting, I stopped commuting there. But no, it was up until 2003.
Have you ever done an evaluation on someone on death row and said, you know what? No issues here. The death sentence should go forward.
It is not up to me. I've never been asked that, so I've never had to.
Well, have you ever done an evaluation that says, I find no mental disease or defect in this individual?
Yep.
Tell me about that. Who was that?
I don't remember the name, though I believe that I spoke to Mr. Tellini about it. And by God, it turned out that the guy hadn't done it. But
This
You
is
know-
someone who didn't even do the crime?
right, but his attorney did not believe it. And it turned out, I learned ages later that it was dropped and that he had not committed the crime.
You did an evaluation and said there's no mental illness involved in this person?
I did. And I should tell you that, may I expand on that a little bit?
Sure. It'd be nice to know the name so we can confirm.
I don't know the name. I think it was Chicago. No, I was going to tell you about finding this person who had simply not committed the murder. I'm sorry, I don't think I have anything to add to that, except
Okay,
that that
let's-
did happen.
We'll move on if you're okay with that. You all right?
Right.
Okay. You talk about the first time you experienced dissociative identity disorder in your book, Guilty by Reason of Insanity. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And you describe it being a really a life-changing experience for you, correct?
Well, it was an eye-opener.
In fact, you even wrote that looking back on other evaluations, you probably missed it. You probably missed diagnosing several inmates with dissociative identity disorder based on what you did on this particular individual.
Right, and I think I explained to the jury, I have no question, I have made my mistakes.
Do you remember that individual's name?
Marie Moore?
I'm sorry?
Marie Moore?
Marie Moore. And you talk about Marie Moore in your book. Do you remember that?
Very well.
Do you want to describe what you write in your book about how you discovered that she had another persona?
Is that,
I can, why don't I ask you if this is consistent? So you're interviewing her and she's committed a horrible crime and you're trying to get to whatever mental illnesses she might have. You suspect that she might have dissociative identity disorder based on what her attorney tells you. Is that correct?
I don't suspect it. I am told it. I don't suspect it. And I made several phone calls to people who knew a lot more than I. I believe one was Cluft, who is, I think, the country's, or one of the national, experts in this. And I called colleagues and discussed the case with them. And I thought, I just don't, I haven't seen this and I don't know if it exists, but okay, because the attorney asked me whether I would do this. And I did. If you want me to explain what happened,
Let me,
how I
between two of
discovered,
them.
yeah.
Okay?
I beg your pardon?
Between the two of us, I think we'll get out what happened, but going into it, you had quite a bit of skepticism. Even though the attorney is telling you they got multi-personality disorders, because that's what it was called at that time.
What they said was that they thought, some people thought that she may have this, and they said that people that she had spoken to, kids who were around where she lived, said that at times she sounded like a man and that she asked to be called Billy. That was what they knew. And that's what they told me. And so they said, Dr. Lewis, while you're seeing her, check up on multiple personality disorder. And I thought, right, I thought I had never seen it, and I didn't think I would. And so I did go to see her, and I could find nothing that quite went along with what I understood this
So
would.
and you're asking her, hey, I want to talk to Billy. Can Billy talk to me? Or words that
No. I don't think I'll tell you what I remember. This is about 100 years ago.
This is back in the 1980s, just so, is that fair?
84 or 86. Yeah. Well, that tells you how long it took me to even think maybe this could be it. But I asked her, based on all these very wise people I had consulted, I asked her whether, I said to her, there are people who say that sometimes you want to be called Billy or what have you. And she said, yes, people have told me this, but I don't know. And I said, many people who have been through the kinds of things that you've been through, many people have been bothered, like sexually by other people or whatever. Has anything like this ever happened to you, whatever? No, Dr. Lewis, never. Nothing like this ever happened to me. So finished, done with evaluation. Right? But no, it did not happen. And no one ever did this. And we talked, and I do need to see a patient more than once and for a while. So I said, I really need to leave now. There was an investigator had driven me out and put his head in the door and said, we have to leave. And I said, Marie, I'm so sorry, but I have to leave now. And, but I will come back and I will talk to you again. And she said, don't leave. She said, there's something I have to tell you, very much as I'm telling you. And so I sat. I do have endless patience when time has, does not just stop at the end of an hour. So I waited, and I said, I just can't stay. I have a lift. I have to go. Marie, I will come back. And I promised you we'll talk some more. And she said, don't go. There's something I have to tell you. And so I waited. And then, as is my wont, I picked up my little yellow pad, and because the guy was waiting outside, and I said, I'll be back, Maria, we'll talk again, but I have to leave. I got up and stood up, walked toward the door, put my hand on the doorknob, and opened the door, and behind me, a voice said, don't go. And it was chilling. And, I turned around, and by the way, I thought she and I looked a bit alike. They were in the days of the big glasses, and, you kind of looked pretty simple with big, full glasses. And I turned around, and instead of this kind of wimpy looking girl with the glasses looking at me, she had changed, and she was sitting with her legs towards the door, her hands on her knees, and, in a masculine kind of look. And she said, "Don't go. There's something I have to tell you." And she put out her hand, and I put out mine, and I took hers, and I said, "Billy?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Wait a minute." And because I was scared, I had not seen this before.
And Doctor, if I can just
Yeah.
stop you there, just so I can
Yeah.
have the record be clear. So when you're referring to things that Billy said, you're using a male voice?
Yes, I'm
And-
imitating it as much as I can.
Okay, I
Yeah.
just want the record to reflect that. Go ahead, please continue.
Yeah, I'm sometimes better at it than, but it was this harsh kind of thing. And I, I kept the door open, and I don't remember the man's name. I said, "Mr. So-and-so, don't go. There's someone that needs to meet you." I really meant there's someone I need in here to kind of protect me. And the investigator came in and sat, and he said hello, and he said, "Billy." I forget who said which first. And he sat down, and then we talked a bit. And I guess he had said Billy, or I said Billy, and he said yes. And I then asked some of the same questions that I had asked before. And I said to, if memory serves, I said, Billy, when I was talking with Marie, and she said that so-and-so had never bothered her sexually. I said, did anything ever happen to Marie or whatever? And the only way I can talk about it is saying Billy. And Billy said, I said, "Did the father ever do anything?" And she said, or he, "Sure he did." And she said, when she was, I don't remember if it was 2 or 4, he put pencils in her rectum. When she was, I believe he said 12. When she was 12, he had sex with her. And it had been denied. Marie had absolutely denied this. I could have left there, decided that the attorneys were crazy, and I was not, and left, but this happened. And so after talking a bit with her, I said, "We do have to go now, and but I will come back, and I will see you again." And I did come back, and I did see her again.
And you eventually diagnosed her with dissociative identity disorder, or multi-personality disorder, as it was called back then.
Well, multiple personality disorder was what the term was then, but it was pretty convincing.
And so how many diagnoses?
There was one other thing that went on there.
I want to move on from that. I think the jury gets a picture of what that evaluation was, but needless to say, that was the first diagnosis that you made, multi-personality disorder, which is now dissociative identity disorder.
Correct.
How many diagnoses have you made since then?
Oh, I don't know, because we subsequently ran a clinic at Bellevue, and I remember it must have lasted for about 5 years, and my recollection was because it made no money. Somehow the fields I go into are not the most lucrative.
Oh no, $300 an hour sounds pretty good to me.
It depends how long, whatever. And anyway, what I can tell you is that Bellevue closed the clinic because it was not supporting itself. And that's a very big deal now. And by that time, I was surprised they would do this, because we had 100 cases at that point. That month at Bellevue, in that particular clinic, there were 100 cases. Now, this may be piddling for an ordinary clinic, but for a particular specialty kind of clinic on an offbeat disorder, I thought that it would at least support itself, and it didn't. And so I can say that we had, at the time, there were 100 visits. I should say there were 100 visits to Bellevue, to that clinic. So that gives you some idea of the number of cases that came through. And the clinic lasted for only about 4 or 5 years. And of course, at first there were very few. And then as we became better known around Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, more patients were referred. But we didn't always make that diagnosis. Obviously, you could see patients and they didn't have it.
But you made that diagnosis more often since the Marie case.
Of course.
Would you say 100 times?
I really don't know. It would be a guess, but certainly I know how to interview better now. I know how to interpret things better now than I did then. And
Have
if you
all
asked
those
how many I missed, I probably missed more than I ever made.
have all those diagnoses been in criminal cases where someone's facing criminal charges?
No. In fact, our first case when the clinic opened it at Bellevue was a 4-year-old child from our kindergarten or preschool there, a child who was referred to the clinic and who indeed.
In criminal cases, do you have any skepticism going in that the person may be faking dissociative identity disorder?
Always.
Tell us about that.
Just that you always have to be skeptical about it. Well, just even about your own skills, not just whether somebody's faking or not. You have to you have to be appropriately modest about your skills and your ability to recognize it. Sure.
And in your book, you write, alternate personalities leave evidence of their existence all over the place. Jonathan, who is the neuropsychologist, is that right?
No, he died. He was a professor of neurology at Yale,
Okay.
and then at St. Elizabeth.
You say Jonathan and I have been able to trace clues of multiple personality disorder all the way back to early childhood.
Yeah.
Teacher reports, social service records, medical charts, letters to friends and relatives, journals, diaries, drawings, all pieces of the puzzle that, when fitted together, reveal the picture of a divided, often fragmented mind.
That often did. Correct. What I'm saying there is that you get data. In fact, I noticed that in some of your reports, I think there were references to certain kinds of SCID, interviews and things of that sort. But
just what reports?
what I was trying to say is that when we make a diagnosis, I pretty much insist that there has to have been evidence that this existed long before I ever set eyes on the person or the person set eyes on me. And very often you will find writings or drawings or all sorts of evidence that somebody has produced, or even signing into hospitals, all sorts of things. And I insist that whatever it is, have, or try at least to have evidenced itself long before they saw me, because you're very open to being accused of suggesting and of giving someone an idea that, oh, they must have this because you can suggest it. And this is why, at least in our clinic, we would search for evidence that antedated any contact with us or with our clinic, and still do.
And that's why you would never want to suggest to a defendant that you're doing a forensic evaluation on that they may have some kind of mental disease or disorder, right? How what you mean by not suggesting?
No, by not, no, by just looking back, because you can usually look back and find evidence of, let's say, different names and different signatures. You can very often, you can find different artistic styles and different signatures at the bottom of them. So that you look back so that nothing you did influenced what you used to make your diagnosis. And it's how we try to at least be certain that we have not created anything that wasn't there.
It seems to me then family members might be very relevant to interview with regards to not their loved one.
If they would.
Dissociative identity disorder, correct?
Well, there's one fallacy there, which is very often the abuser has been a family member. And with Marie Moore, the father would not allow the mother to come in or be seen alone. They came in together, would say next to nothing.
Well,
And,
I'm gonna talk about this case. Okay?
Well, but family members are not necessarily the best in the world. Far better is looking back at what the person himself or herself has created prior to your
The person who created that may have a reason not to tell you the truth, right?
wrong.
Wait a minute here. You just said a few minutes ago that you're skeptical going into these interviews because people who are charged with crimes may have a reason to fake it. You don't remember saying
And
that?
that is why you would have your data antedate any crime, any contact with them, because you can't retrospectively malinger. And it's vital for everyone to remember that you cannot retrospectively malinger. Oh, gee, I'm going to sign this painting differently because 10 years from now, I'm going to commit murder. Come on.
Well,
That is why you cannot, that's why you don't just take something that was produced after you met with the person, why you look back and you beat the bushes for any data. Letters, old letters to people, letters to and from, old social work records, old medical records where you signed in for some procedure.
What about a daughter named Harley Hunt that had been with the defendant her whole life, every day of her life? You don't think it'd be relevant to talk to her to see if she saw any signs of dissociative identity disorder?
Oh, sure, it would be very helpful.
So
And
what did Harley have to tell you when you talked to her?
I asked the attorneys with whom I could speak, and I was not put in touch with any of these people. And so I did not use them unless if they had years before made some kinds of notations about the person, that would be kosher. You could probably look at that. But
You say in your book that there was a case in Florida you were subpoenaed or asked to come and give opinions on, and the wouldn't do what you asked them to do, an MRI, EG, biological testing, and you refused to testify. Remember that?
I don't remember which case it was. No, this was written when, in 86? I don't.
Well, why didn't you do that
I don't
here?
recall that case.
Why didn't you do that here?
I tried.
Why didn't you refuse to testify? Because you didn't have done what you wanted to have done.
Perhaps guilt. I don't know why. But
And speaking of that,
I probably should have.
you were to be here at 9 o'clock this morning. Why were you not here at 9 o'clock?
I don't know. I was supposed to be here 2 weeks ago, and I was told that at the last minute that I was not to come until last Friday. I do not know. The timing is someone else's.
And your report was due on February 13th of 2023 with regards to insanity. You know that too, don't you? You know there's discovery requirements for your report when you enter a criminal case of this nature, that you need to give us your report 35 days before trial, correct?
No, that, this is new to me. However, I did the best that I could. I could not provide you with what you wanted until I got data. And even when I did not get the data, I did the best that I could with what I was given.
And you provided, or at least somebody typed up a report that was given to us 4 days before we started jury selection. Do you have a disregard with the rules here? What's going on here?
I don't think I have a disregard for the rules.
Do you have an unconscious bias with regards to dissociative identity disorder?
An unconscious bias of what? What are you talking about?
Based on your evaluation, Marie, and all the other diagnoses you make, you go into evaluations thinking, I'm going to look for dissociative identity disorder.
No more than I'm going to look to see whether there is bipolar disorder, whether there is brain damage, whether there is a seizure disorder. No, no more.
What does crazy, not insane mean?
Crazy, not insane means that there are individuals who have very severe mental illness. Call it crazy, but they are not considered insane because they may not meet the criteria of that particular state or whatever it is, so that they may be crazy as a bedbug, but it does not fit an insanity defense, and the insanity varies, as you know, from state to state, so that you can be quite crazy in one place, but not insane.
So you can commit a murder where there may not be any motive or any reason why that person committed the murder, but yet you could still be legally sane. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think that's what I said, no.
And you commit a murder that may not have a motive to it and still be legally sane. For instance, a mother shakes a baby. What's that baby? No reason other than the baby crying. Person still be legally sane.
Can the person be sane?
Yes.
Depending on where this occurs, yeah.
Is that what you mean by crazy, not insane?
That is only one, that's only one small.
There's millions.
What?
There's probably hundreds of crimes that fit that category.
I think they're probably more crazy than insane disorders. How's that?
Okay.
Uh,
Legal insanity is a pretty high calling.
Depends where.
Well, I talked to you about Colorado, but I'm not sure we can.
Now I'm going to have to go look up the exact rule. I take it McNaughton does not fly in Colorado?
Well, let me ask you a question about these reports that you alluded to in one of your answers. You said, based on what your expert reports said. Do you remember saying that in one of your answers?
No, I don't, but go ahead.
Well, what reports are you referring to?
I don't know what report you're referring to.
Well, there's only one report with regards to insanity in this case other than yours, correct?
As far as I know,
And that's the report by Dr. Gray and Dr. Torres. Correct?
Did you say one of my reports? Aren't they people that are from your side of the?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. Why do you think they're on our side?
Because they work for the state.
Okay. Well, you work for the state. You're getting paid by the state.
I don't know whom I'm getting paid by, but I assume that they're working on your side because you have asked them. Had you asked me to evaluate Letecia, I probably would have said yes. I'd be glad to evaluate Letecia.
Would it surprise you that the court is the one that actually asked the state hospital to do a neutral evaluation?
No, it would not. However, when you ask the state to do this, the state is the one that is, the people there are being paid by the state. And it is usually with that slant, just as when a public defender gets a case, it is usually slanted in that direction.
Are you basing that just because they found her legally sane at the time? That somehow we brought them into this case?
No, I'm not basing it on anything. I don't know them. I don't know.
You're quite familiar and you've testified in other murder cases where the prosecution actually goes out and hires an expert. That person comes in and testifies on behalf of the prosecution, correct? Like Park Dietz and Associates.
That's the only thing the only person I can think of. So
That didn't happen in this case, did it?
I don't get it. I mean, Park Dietz is Park Dietz. Why?
So you have no idea how Dr. Gray and Dr. Torres became involved in this evaluation?
I'm assuming that they were requested by you or by the court to do this evaluation.
You said that you read 100 pages of police reports?
I didn't recall giving a number. I said hundreds of pages of different reports,
How long did it take you to get through all that information?
hours.
Thousands and thousands of pages, right?
I don't know, hundreds certainly.
Reports from the FBI, correct?
I would have to go over it. I know I carried a suitcase here that weighed probably over 100 pounds, but I don't know how many pages.
Reports from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, correct? You review those?
Dozens and dozens of reports, yes.
What about reports from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina? Did you review those?
I would have to look over this again, because again, I looked at these a while back, but I did bring them with me. So if you wanted me to look over what I have with me, I can tell you.
Well, tell me what you recall reviewing.
I would have to look at them. I don't recall the name of each place and each organization.
Mr. Tellini asked you questions about him being in an interview room while you're conducting the evaluation. You remember him asking you that?
Yes,
Do you remember giving 3 answers? 1, want them to see what I see. That was your first answer, correct?
right,
And you knew this was being videotaped, correct?
right.
Why couldn't they just watch the video?
In my experience, it is helpful for me to have the person who is responsible for the case to see what I see. Another reason would be, I've said to them, try not to interrupt me if you can avoid it, but if there is something toward the end or something that you feel I need to know that I've just failed to ask about, please feel free to ask it or ask me, can you ask it? So that there are a number of reasons why I like the person to see what I see and also to enable me to see what he or she sees that I may have missed.
Well, isn't it kind of awkward because the attorney there is the one deciding to pay you based on your work? Doesn't that make it awkward for you and the defendant to be in the same room with the attorney as you're doing a forensic evaluation?
No.
And you certainly would not want the attorney to interject and become part of that evaluation, which
There are occasions when it's very important, when something vital is left out. And if the person were not there, I would not even know enough to ask later on. So
would you consider that to be an unbiased interview if the person who's working in the best interest of the client is asking questions during the forensic interview?
I think it depends what the questions are. I think I told you in an interview, I've said, look, if you two are going to continue with this, let's stop now and I quit. Talk about it with each other and I'll come back, so that I try very hard not to play along.
You said the second factor was dissociative cases. There's a lot of skepticism prevailing in the case. Do you remember saying that?
I'm sure I have many times.
What does the attorney have to be in the courtroom to alleviate that second factor of yours?
It's very important for him to see what I see. For example, in this particular case, Letecia's accent changed and became incomprehensible. And it's important for me to have another person see what I see and then say, did you see what I see? Or something of that sort, so that it is helpful.
You don't think that has an impact on the defendant? Having you tell the attorney, look at that, did you see that?
Do I do that? Have you ever seen me do that?
Question?
No,
Question?
because I did not ever do that.
Judge, I've asked the witness to allow me to finish my question.
Need to wait till he finishes his question, and then you'll get a chance to respond.
You don't think that would have an impact on the defendant and her ability to act a certain way based on what you're saying, her attorney in the room at the time that she's saying things?
Could you repeat what you said first about what I said and what he said and whether it would?
Well, we're going to see the video here in a minute. We're going to watch the video.
Yeah.
My question is, do you think it would have an impact on the defendant's ability to act a certain way based on what you're telling her attorney in the same room?
I do not believe that what I do or the way in which I do it on occasion, if I want the attorney to be there or someone else from the attorney's side, I feel that I am more likely to find out the truth than if I'm on my own and I have failed to pick up something. I will often say, wait until the end. If you can wait until the end. And then please raise any questions you have that I may have misunderstood or may have been wrong. But I do this in the interest of trying to learn as much as I can.
Do you think the attorney might have an interest, in your opinion, in the outcome of that interview?
Of course.
Did you have any safety concerns when you're interviewing Ms. Stauch on those 3 days?
I think that just the very fact that I have somebody there tells you that I always have enough sense to try to keep myself safe and calm so I don't have to worry about my own safety.
You interviewed her hours, in the morning, in the afternoon, 3 days in a row. By the time you got to the third day, do you feel a need to have an attorney in there with you for safety reasons?
Yes.
Why?
Well, a case I had a while back, I actually was flying out to Florida for, forget what part of the case it was, late at night. There was a woman attorney with the patient, and by the time I arrived at the prison, the patient had attacked the woman. She had been alone in the room with this person whom she knew well. It's an eye-opener and it's a lesson, and it can happen. And now here this woman had known the defendant for a long time. No, I don't think that I'm that good that after a few hours with somebody, I am perfectly safe. The other thing is with dissociation, a person can switch on a dime. And if you look at the tapes, you'll see that a person, just as they can switch an accent, and it just happens and you barely notice and then you see it, a person can switch on a dime in terms of how they perceive you. And you can be safe 1 minute. This friend of mine was stabbed shortly before I arrived there to interview the defendant, and I was not permitted to do the interview, and that was that. But no, I do not think that the third day I'm necessarily safe on my own. I would be a fool.
But you talked about someone switching on a dime. You didn't diagnose Ms. Stauch with dissociative identity. 2023. Why were you concerned about her switching on a dime if you hadn't made a diagnosis yet?
Because I don't know when I come and see a patient what the disorder is. And there are other disorders in which someone can switch on a dime. And, or you could say something stupid or the wrong thing and the atmosphere changes. So that I don't know, maybe I'm a coward, but
I don't think you're a coward. Does everyone who is diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, are they legally insane throughout the United States?
no.
Of course not, right? There's a spectrum.
I taught you that.
I went to school for 7.5 years. I might have picked up a few things. But anyway, there's some who are more severe than others. There's some that may not impact their life whatsoever, correct?
I don't know.
Because you only look at criminals, right?
No.
Okay.
Come on.
Your opinion is that something that happened over 20 years ago with Miss Stauch's stepfather is the origin of her traumatic stress that leads to dissociative identity disorder. Did I get that right?
No.
Tell us, what's the origin of
I
it?
do not know enough about what she suffered or experienced as an infant, as a child, as somebody growing up, nor have I spoken with her relatives, friends, acquaintances personally, so that I cannot possibly say that. In my experience, I'm staggered by how very, very early ongoing intolerable torture can create this. And you can, sometimes you can get a hint of when it happened because when the person is in a certain dissociative state, they may draw the way a 3-year-old does. And it may turn out that as you learn more, that maybe it was at around that time that that the major trauma occurred. But it's
Well, let me,
I don't know
Make
what
sure I
caused it.
wrote down your answers right.
Yeah.
But you said the cause is early ongoing physical and or sexual abuse that is intolerable. Can't cope with it anymore. Mind self-hypnotic.
It is as if you left out as if. It is as if the person has gone into a self-hypnotic state. I have used that term because for me, it makes sense. You will find others, experts far better than I, who may use a different term in terms of the way in which the mind changes. But for me, it is most understandable to say it is a type of self-hypnosis. Because, you know, if you kind of think you are someone else and you're talking differently, it is like a self-hypnotic state. And is unconscious, it is not conscious.
Regardless, you indicated that these assaults happened back when Ms. Stauch was 15 years old. Remember saying
No,
that?
I said I know only from other people's histories, and maybe one time where she told me from about age 5 to age 10, some things occurred, that these things have been documented by other people. I am not telling you when. I suspect that we don't know a lot of what went on early.
But we do know that she got a softball scholarship, that she got a doctorate's degree, that she,
Would you explain the doctorate's degree, where she got it and how?
did you not know that she got a doctorate's degree, doctor?
I don't know if you count it the same. It was over the internet, and it was like Coursera or something like that. I think that you need to look at that a bit.
You know more about it than I do. I didn't know that.
You
anything
didn't
about
know that?
it.
Okay.
No.
Well, it was
What's that?
I don't know, some of those big boxes.
Watch the videos. It's not on the videos.
It's not there. I don't know, but that's where she got it. That's where she says she got it.
But anyway, that didn't impact her ability to go through college.
Yeah, it did. Her college was also, I believe her degree was a computer, you know, an internet.
And she succeeded in life, had a daughter, married twice,
Wow.
right? And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere,
Why would you say succeeded, married twice? This is not a victory.
she didn't murder anybody. She didn't murder anybody within that 20-year period.
But she managed to marry some really unpleasant people. I'd say those were big mistakes.
And just coincidentally, you come involved, and now all of a sudden, this event that happened 21 years ago is the cause for her killing an 11-year-old girl. Is that what you're telling this jury?
No, I'm not telling you this.
Then why is it relevant?
We're trying to understand what happened and why it happened. And I'm just telling you what causes, in my experience, in my limited experience, what causes this kind of phenomenon. But I don't consider her having married twice inappropriate and less than loving human beings a success, nor do I consider her degrees.
When do you
enormous.
think her dissociative identity disorder started?
Wow. I don't know with her. If you were to ask me earliest, the first patient in our clinic was 4 years old.
You didn't think that was important for your opinion to give this jury when her diagnosis started?
Only if I knew it.
Well, you know, you reviewed the jail records in this case, right?
But they're incomplete, and we don't have enough data to say when this started, but you can be pretty sure that it tends to be early and ongoing and intolerable.
Well, it started when she said it started after June 5th when her competency was raised in court. You remember reading that?
It doesn't matter what she says when she says something started.
In fact, Dr. Torres specifically asked her during the competency evaluation, you answered a question a certain way about multiple personalities. Would you tell us about that? And Ms. Stauch didn't have anything to say about it. Remember that?
I don't know.
Would that be significant in your opinion?
I would have to know the whole context of it.
In fact, it wasn't until the second competency evaluation with Dr. Grimmett that dissociative identity disorder became an issue in this case. Right?
I believe you. I don't know that for sure, but it certainly could be.
You reviewed the reports, did you not?
I did, but I reviewed hundreds of pages and I can't quote date.
Yeah, I don't know if the court, how much longer you want to go. It's about 10 till.
About 5 more minutes.
Okay.
But it's up to you. I understand the subject, so.
I've got, we're going to get into videos tomorrow, so I've got quite a bit more. It'd
let's
be
go for
good.
about 5 more minutes.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
You indicated on direct examination that it's very common for an individual to split off to take the characteristics of their abuser when they have dissociative identity disorder.
Yes, I've seen it often.
Did you see it, Ms. Stauch?
I can't say for sure I saw that with her. I don't know. No.
Rita Sanchez has nothing to do with her stepfather. Would you call him Crazy Ass James or something like that?
What about him?
Jackass James. That's what it was.
Yeah, but did she turn into Jackass James?
That's what I'm asking you.
I didn't hear that or see it or what did you? I don't know where you're coming from.
Well, you said on direct that it's common, very common, I think you said, that individuals take on a persona of their abuser.
I said it is common, right, and it is common. But that doesn't mean that in this case it happened. I'm just informing the jury it is common, and I'm saying this to you so that you don't say, oh, we're going to get rid of so-and-so sometime because he's terrible, because he's listening when you're there. And it's not a good idea to do that. That's all.
Did you have any indication whatsoever that Jackass James was one of her personas?
I don't think that I got to know her well enough or see her often enough to say that.
You didn't ask her for Jackass James to come out and talk to you, did you?
No, I tend not to ask for alternative people to come and talk to me.
Well, you asked Maria Sanchez to talk to you.
Only because she told me Maria existed. I had not heard of Maria. And, so I would say, is it possible to talk to her, particularly because she did give us a clue that Maria Sanchez is a very violent character, and there are guns and there are all sorts of things. So that, of course, I would want to say, is it possible to talk to this person? I'm not saying I want you to talk to me, but is it possible for me to talk to so-and-so?
And the DSM-5 talks about a triggering event that causes someone who suffers with dissociative identity disorder to trigger that event. Is that
Say that again?
the DSM-5 talks about a triggering event, something traumatic that triggers that individual to change personalities when they're diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder.
It can be, there can be any number of triggers.
What trigger did you use to have her change to Maria Sanchez?
I do not consciously use a trigger. It could be I have brown hair that's a trigger. It could be no trigger that I have done. It could be looking at the light there and there's a green light there. And a trigger is not, it isn't you press a button and that does it. But there are different things that have an association to a person and that may then elicit a memory and a flashback and it could create a switch. But, I don't invite a trigger.
But what you did here is, hey, can I talk to Maria Sanchez? And all of a sudden, fake accent comes out and she starts talking.
I don't even know if Maria Sanchez sounds, to me, she sounds Hispanic, and whatever talked to me sounded Russian without Russian words, but sounded Russian. I don't think Maria Sanchez and the Russian words were the same.
But what you said on direct is
Yeah.
that she spoke Russian. You didn't say
No,
it sounded Russian.
I didn't. I said it sounded Russian. I would ask the jury to confirm this.
Why couldn't,
I said it were not words.
if I just get one question in? Why is it that Dr. Torres, and asked her, can I speak to Maria Sanchez? Can't change. She says, I'm not able to change that persona. But when you ask, she's able to change.
Magic.
Okay, those are my questions for today. We'll start tomorrow morning.